Hi everyone, I'm Dale, and my parents gave me a strange key before they died. Now, a billionaire is after me. But first things first, shout out and credit to Troy Forrester. Today's story is inspired by your title idea. Remember to post your new title ideas in the comments below. It needs to be an original story, something we haven't done already. Give a like to the ones you would like to see animated. For the most active members who create very popular titles, we will contact you to join a secret server on Discord to offer you behind-the-scenes access. For now, let's jump straight into today's thrilling story. It hasn't been easy being poor. I'm not complaining. It's just that, I don't know. I just feel like some people go through life with so much ease. Meanwhile, my family is just in a constant uphill battle. As early as I can remember, we've just been struggling. Mom held 2 jobs while Dad was always away, providing for us. I don't really know what he did. Neither of my parents ever talked about it. But I knew for sure, if Dad didn't work, we wouldn't even be able to afford having a roof over our heads. Most of the time, Mom and I get to eat twice. But sometimes, when her hours get cut at the grocery store she works at, we only get to have 1 meal in a day. I didn't blame my parents that we were poor. They broke their backs working so hard so I could get everything I needed. They got to send me to the best schools. Even if it meant that they had to work all the time and they never got time off on weekends. I just wish we weren't so poor because I never liked seeing my parents suffer so much. Sometimes, I even wish I hadn't been born because they're working so hard because of me. The worst happened without warning. One day, Mom was healthy and strong. The next, she was bedridden. That night, she fell asleep and never woke up again. I waited for my dad to come. I didn't know what to do. I called 911, and when I took my mom away, I stayed in that house for 5 days before anyone even wondered how I was. Dad never came home. Suddenly, I was orphaned without explanation. I lost everything. The only thing I got was a strange-looking key. My mom put it in my hand before she went to sleep, and she didn't tell me which door it was for. I tried it on every lock in the house, but it didn't fit any of them. I ended up wearing it as a pendant. I spent days waiting for my dad, but he never did. So, the social workers placed me on different foster homes until they could locate my closest family. That was when I got adopted by the cheapest family in the world. That family was my aunt's. She was rich, like really rich. But before then, I never even heard she and her family existed. But what I didn't understand was how a really rich person like her could be so cheap. She would only buy things that she can use coupons for. She recycled her bathwater to wash the dishes, and she made her kids share one single toothbrush. Now, I understand being cheap. I was poorer than poor. I knew how to stretch things and make them last, but my aunt took it way too extreme. I guess that's how she got rich. She just never spent any of her money and used some disgusting ways just to be cheap. One particularly boring night, after I reread my one book that I'd read 10 times before, I was looking for something to occupy my time. My aunt didn't have internet or a TV in the house, so, instead, I took to exploring the place. I wanted to see if there was anything I could do while I waited for my aunt and her kids to come back from the park, and I ended up going into the attic. There, I found something that made my heartbeat go fast. It was a photo. My dad was holding up some sort of vial, and my aunt and several men in lab coats stood behind them, with big smiles on their faces. That was the first clue I ever got about what kind of work my dad did. And then it hit me. If my dad worked with my aunt, she must know what happened to him. Why didn't she ever talk about him? He was a brother, and she never mentioned him. Ever. I found the answer to that question a week later, when my aunt and her kids were out again, and I went exploring around the mansion again. This time, I snooped around in the basement, and there was a door that just looked so way out of place. And then, I saw it. The keyhole. It looked so particular. So familiar. And then, I reached for the key I wore around my neck. And it just made sense. I put the key in and turned it without any difficulty. And then, the lock clicked. The hallway that opened to me was impossibly long-winding. I followed it, even though I was shaking in the knees and my heart was pounding. Every time the fluorescent lighting would flicker, I'd jump from surprise and fear. I must have walked at least half a mile when I saw what waited at the end of that creepy tunnel. It was a lab. All the lights were on, and there was a faint humming from all the working instruments. I heard a click, and the door behind me closed. I screamed. I thought I was gonna die. But the person in front of me shook me, and then I saw him. I thought I'd stumbled into something sinister, and I was about to get killed. But the man who was shaking me was my dad. That whole time, I thought he was dead. I thought I'd been orphaned. Why didn't he even come to Mom's funeral? Why was he here? Wait, he was here. He was here the whole time, with my aunt, and she never mentioned him. I did stumble into something sinister, and I'd been eating, sleeping, and living in the viper's nest. My aunt had kidnapped my dad for some reason, and I wish he could just tell me what had happened. But I quickly realized he couldn't speak anymore. My aunt had his tongue removed, so he wrote everything down to explain everything. It turned out the work he'd been doing was for my aunt's pharmaceutical company. His mission in life was to come up with a cure for my mom's illness. But when he came up with the cure, my aunt took credit for it and wouldn't let him cure my mom, because secretly, my aunt had a crush on her brother. Yeah, she was in love with my dad, her own brother. She wanted my mom gone so she could marry him. But then, my dad rejected her. She kept him locked up so he could never leave her, and so he could come up with new cures that could make her even more rich. She cut his tongue out so he couldn't scream for help. But now her reign of terror ends. I vowed to topple her and make her suffer for all the evil she's done. I left my dad in that tunnel. I promised I'd come back for him. But for now, I had to win my aunt over. I had to make sure she trusted me with all her heart. And then, I'll rip it out. I worked hard. I studied hard. I went into the pharmaceutical field. I got a job at my aunt's company, and I pushed myself to be better than everyone around me. I went to the gym. I used my salary to buy new clothes. I made myself look good. And I made sure I resembled my dad. Slowly but surely, my aunt noticed, and she started coming on to me. "You've grown so fast. I can't believe how much you look like your dad now." I smiled. "Thanks." I was in. I knew I had her. I took her out. I took her on dates. I made sure she fell for me. I kept her distracted. And in the meantime, I worked my way up the company. I made alliances, and I made deals with members of the board. I was going to stage a coup and replace her as CEO. All I needed was the right opportunity. And thanks to my dad, I had the perfect scandal. I snuck back down into the secret lab again, and this time, I videotaped it. I cataloged every single medicine my dad formulated. I took pictures of them, especially the ones my aunt had taken credit for. My aunt didn't even suspect a thing. She thought I was going to be at the office that day to pick her up for a date. Instead, I walked straight into the boardroom where the board members and her were having an important meeting. Everyone turned when I entered the room, and my aunt was visibly surprised. "Oh, Dale, sweetheart, you're a little early. Why don't you go and wait for me in my office? I'm still having a meeting with the board members." "I know, because they told me." "What? What's happening here?" I pressed play, and the projector began to play the recordings I made. The members of the board who didn't yet know how evil my aunt was were all aghast. And then, when I showed them how she cut my dad's tongue out and kept him beneath her house, when I told them that my mom died because of her greed and her evil plans, the board members who were supportive of me called for a vote. I moved to remove Cecilia from her position as CEO. My aunt still hadn't figured it out. "Remove me? I built this company. Who are you going to replace me with? You can't do this without me." I crossed my arms and put a smug smile on my face. "Why did you think I learned all I needed to learn from you this whole time?" The board members all put up their hands, and thanks to all the evidence I compiled, she was taken away by the cops. I finally got to free my dad, and now we live comfortably. I could never bring back my mom, or my dad's ability to talk, or our old life, but at least now we can start again. My dad and I are learning sign language. Wish us luck.